He sat in the same booth every night. Corner table, back to the wall, coffee black, no sugar. The waitress knew his order by heart: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a slice of apple pie he never finished. He'd been coming in for 3 years, always alone, always quiet, always gone by 9 p.m. sharp. The locals called him the old timer, but nobody knew his real name. Until one rainy Thursday evening, when a young college student working the late shift decided to ask a simple question that would change everything they thought they knew about the man who ate dinner in silence. Welcome to the human stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identity, quiet courage, and unexpected revelation, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe that every person has a story worth telling, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Riverside Diner sat on the edge of Highway 17, between the old courthouse and the abandoned textile mill. It wasn't much to look at: checkered linoleum floors, cracked vinyl booths, and a neon sign that flickered more than it shone. But it was the kind of place where coffee was always hot, the pie was homemade, and nobody asked too many questions. That's probably why he chose it. Every night at 6:45 p.m., the old man would push through the glass door, nod to whoever was working the register, and walk straight to booth number 7. Always the same booth. Always the same slow, deliberate steps. He wore clean clothes, pressed khakis, a button-down shirt, and a brown leather jacket that had seen better decades. His hair was silver white, combed neat, and his hands showed the kind of wear that came from years of real work. The waitresses had learned not to hover. He'd order the same thing every time: meatloaf dinner, coffee black, apple pie for dessert. He'd eat slowly, methodically, like he was savoring more than just the food. Maybe the silence, maybe the routine, maybe the fact that in this small corner of the world, he could just be another customer, another face in the crowd. Nobody bothered him. Nobody asked questions. That was the unspoken rule at Riverside Diner. You minded your own business. Sarah Mitchell was different. She was 22, a psychology major at the local community college, working nights to pay for her textbooks. She'd been watching the old man for 2 weeks, not out of nosiness, but out of genuine curiosity. There was something about him that didn't fit the usual patterns. He never looked at his phone because he didn't carry one. He never seemed restless or bored. He just sat there, eating his dinner, occasionally staring out the window at the empty parking lot, lost in thoughts that seemed to run deeper than the evening news. On this particular Thursday, the rain was coming down hard enough to keep most people home. The diner was empty except for the old man and a truck driver reading a newspaper in the front booth. Sarah had been studying for her midterm on human behavior, and maybe that's what gave her the courage to do what no one else had done in 3 years. She walked over to his table, coffee pot in hand, and refilled his cup without being asked. He looked up, surprised but not annoyed. "Thank you," he said quietly. His voice was rough but kind. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then sat down across from him. "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's your name? I mean, you've been coming here for so long, and I realized I don't even know what to call you." The old man studied her face, as if trying to decide whether this was a conversation he wanted to have. Finally he spoke. "Frank," he said. "Frank Castellano." Sarah smiled. "Nice to meet you, Frank. I'm Sarah." "I know," he said. "You're the one who always makes sure my coffee doesn't get cold." She laughed. "Guilty as charged. So, Frank, what brings you here every night, if you don't mind me asking?" Frank looked out the window again, watching the rain streak down the glass. For a moment, Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, slowly, carefully. "I come here because it's the only place that feels like home anymore." There was something in the way he said it, not self-pity, not sadness, just a simple truth that hit harder than any sob story could have. Sarah felt like she was standing at the edge of something important, something real. "Where is home?" she asked gently. Frank's eyes moved back to hers. It used to be everywhere, used to be nowhere. Now it's just here. That's when Sarah noticed his hands. Really noticed them. They were scarred, weathered, but steady. There was a thin white line across his knuckles that looked like it came from something sharp. And on his wrist, barely visible under his sleeve, she caught a glimpse of what looked like a tattoo. "Were you in the military?" she asked. Frank's expression changed, not closed off, but more careful. "A long time ago." "What branch?" "Army. Special Forces." Sarah felt her heart skip. Special Forces. That explained the way he sat, always with his back to the wall, always aware of the exits. That explained the precision in his movements, the way he could sit perfectly still for an hour without fidgeting. "How long were you in?" 26 years, Frank said. "Retired in 98. Sarah did the math. That would make him around 70. But he didn't move like a 70-year-old man. He moved like someone who had trained his body to be a weapon and never quite learned how to turn it off." "What did you do after you retired?" Frank's laugh was dry. "Tried to figure out what normal people do with their lives." "Did you figure it out?" "Still working on it." The conversation continued for another hour. Sarah learned that Frank had been married once, briefly, in the early 80s. His wife couldn't handle the deployments, the secrets. The man who came home different every time he left. No kids, no family to speak of. He had worked security jobs for a while after retiring, but found that civilian life felt like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. "So you come here," Sarah said, "because it's the closest thing to normal you can find." Frank nodded. "Something like that. In here, I'm just another customer, another old man eating meatloaf. Nobody expects me to be anything more than that." Sarah felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Here was a man who had given his entire adult life to serving his country, and now he was spending his golden years alone in a diner, grateful for the anonymity that came with being forgotten. "What did you do in Special Forces?" she asked. Frank's eyes went distant. "Things that don't make for good dinner conversation." "Try me." He looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could handle the truth. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was what they called a cleaner. When missions went wrong, when soldiers were trapped behind enemy lines, when the official channels couldn't get involved, they sent me in. Alone. I'd go in, get our people out, and make sure there was no evidence we were ever there." Sarah felt the weight of those words settle over the table like a heavy blanket. "How many times?" 43 missions, across 4 different conflicts. Never lost a man I was sent to retrieve. "And afterward?" "Afterward, I came home to a country that didn't want to know what I'd done, a country that was happy to sleep safely in their beds as long as they didn't have to think about the price." Sarah sat in silence, processing what she'd just heard. This quiet old man, who ate meatloaf and left generous tips, was a living ghost. A man who had walked through hell 43 times and never asked for anything in return except the right to fade into the background. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Frank shrugged. "Because you asked, and because it's been a long time since anyone cared enough to ask." From that night forward, everything changed. Not dramatically, but gradually. Frank still came in every night at 6:45, still ordered the same meal, still sat in the same booth. But now he wasn't alone. Sarah would sit with him now he wasn't alone. Sarah would sit with him during her breaks, and they'd talk. About books, about movies, about the world beyond Highway 17. Other customers started to notice, the truck drivers, the late shift workers, the occasional traveler passing through. They'd see the young college student sitting with the old man, laughing at something he'd said, listening intently to stories that never quite revealed all their secrets. Word spread slowly through the small town. Not gossip exactly, but awareness. The old man at the diner wasn't just another retiree killing time. He was Frank Castellano, former Special Forces, a man who had served his country in ways that most people couldn't imagine. People started nodding when they passed his booth. Veterans from other wars, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan, began stopping by his table. Not to compare stories or swap war tales, but just to sit with someone who understood the weight of service, the cost of duty, the loneliness that came with carrying secrets that could never be shared. Frank never encouraged the attention, but he didn't discourage it either. He'd listen to their stories, offer quiet words of understanding, and remind them that they weren't alone in their struggles to find their place in a world that had moved on without them. One night, a young Marine back from his third deployment in Afghanistan sat down across from Frank without invitation. His hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes had the 1,000-yard stare that Sarah had learned to recognize. "I don't know how to do this," the young man said. "I don't know how to be normal." Frank looked at him for a long moment, then spoke with the authority of someone who had walked that path. "You don't have to be normal," he said. "You just have to be here. One day at a time, one cup of coffee at a time, one conversation at a time." The Marine nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "Does it get easier?" "No," Frank said honestly, "but you get stronger, and you learn that strength isn't about carrying everything alone. Sometimes it's about letting someone else carry a little bit of the weight." Sarah watched from behind the counter, understanding that she was witnessing something profound. This wasn't just a conversation between two veterans. This was the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next, the quiet transfer of knowledge that couldn't be taught in any manual or classroom. Months passed. The diner became a kind of unofficial gathering place for veterans of all ages. They'd come in, order coffee, and sit with Frank, sharing their stories, or simply enjoying the company of someone who understood their unique brand of silence. Sarah continued her studies, but she found herself drawn more and more to the stories unfolded in booth number 7. She changed her major from psychology to social work, inspired by the healing she witnessed every night in the corner of a small-town diner. One evening, as Frank was finishing his usual slice of apple pie, Sarah sat down across from him with a question she'd been wanting to ask for months. "Frank, do you ever regret it? All those years of service, all those missions?" Frank considered the question carefully, as he always did. "Regret is a luxury I can't afford," he said finally. "Every mission I completed, every soldier I brought home, every secret I carried, it all led to this moment, to this place, to these conversations. But you gave up so much: marriage, family, a normal life." Frank smiled, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, it reached his eyes. "I thought I had. But look around you." Sarah looked. The diner was full of veterans, young and old, sharing stories, offering support, finding community in the most unlikely of places. Frank had become the center of a family he'd never planned, a father figure to men and women who needed someone to show them that they could survive the transition from warrior to civilian. "This is my family," Frank said quietly. "These are my children. And this," he gestured to the worn booth, the flickering neon sign, the smell of coffee and homemade pie. "This is my home." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "And what am I?" Frank reached across the table and patted her hand gently. "You're the daughter who asked the right question at the right time. You're the reason I remembered that my story wasn't over. It was just waiting for the next chapter to begin." As Sarah walked home that night, she thought about the power of a simple question. "What's your name?" Such a basic human interaction, yet it had unlocked a lifetime of stories, created a community of healing, and reminded a forgotten hero that he was still needed, still valued, still loved. Frank Castellano never became famous. His story never made the headlines or the history books, but every night at 6:45, he continued to push through the glass door of Riverside Diner, order his meatloaf dinner, and sit in booth number 7. And now, instead of eating alone, he was surrounded by the family he'd never expected to find and the home he'd never thought he'd have. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about the battles we win or the medals we earn. Sometimes they're about the quiet courage to keep showing up one day at a time until someone finally asks your name and gives you the chance to remember who you really are. So I ask you now, have you ever sat next to someone whose story you never bothered to learn? Have you passed by someone who might have been carrying the weight of untold sacrifice? Share their name in the comments. Tell us what you discovered, because every person has a story worth telling, and every story deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching The Human Stories. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us continue honoring the quiet heroes who walk among us every day. We'll see you in the next story, and until then, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in the most ordinary places.